Greetings to everyone. As I said in the previous class, the arrival of the Portuguese in 1498 opened a new era, both in the history of the nation as well as the history of the Christian community. Now, when they came to Malabar, particularly to Kozhikode in 1498, under the leadership of Vasco da Gama, they had several purposes in their mind. Mainly, they wanted to establish their colonies in India and in the other Asian countries. They wanted to involve in trade and make probably maximum profit out of that. So they came to Kozhikode, entered into a treaty with the king of Kozhikode, Samutiri, then with the king of Kannur, Kolathiri. Then they moved towards the south. They entered into a treaty with the king of Kochi, and then rounding the Cape Comorin, they began to move to the Coromandel coast, Bay of Bengal's coast, and in several places they established their colonies. Then in 1510, I just made some remarks in the previous class. In 1510, under the leadership of the Portuguese captain Albuquerque, Goa was captured by them. That was governed by the Sultan of Bijapur then. So there was a fierce battle between Albuquerque and the Sultan of Bijapur, and eventually Goa was captured by them. Then they began to employ several measures to propagate the Roman Catholic faith, because all the people in Portugal, they belonged to the Roman Catholic faith, and the people as well as the king of Portugal, they were highly interested in propagating the Roman Catholic faith everywhere. Even considering the interest of the king of Portugal, the Pope granted a permission which is known by the name Padroado, an ecclesiastical right given by the Pope to the king of Portugal to do everything possible to send missionaries, to appoint them in different places. So all the freedom was given to the king of Portugal to look after the growth of Roman Catholicism wherever they go for colonial purpose. So they came to India, and Goa totally came under their control. Some untoward incidents also took place in Goa, or which we cannot accept or give our approval. They began to convert the people in Goa by using the forcible conversion to some extent began to take place in Goa. Some of the worship places of other religions were demolished also by the Portuguese. All the privileges and the job were given to the Christians. So that was one of the upper-handedness of the Portuguese in Goa, not only in Goa but everywhere, wherever they went. But that was for the particular cause, for the growth and the spread of Roman Catholic faith. The second purpose was to involve in trade. When Portuguese came to Malabar, before their arrival, the Arabs were having the monopoly of trade. Now there was a war between the Portuguese and the Arabs, particularly related to this trade connection. And totally the Arabs were brought under the control of the Portuguese, and they were totally removed from the scene. And Portuguese took control over complete trade between Malabar and the Western countries. This brought enormous wealth into the hands of the Portuguese. And they used all opportunities to expand their influence, to propagate their faith, and also to make maximum profit out of everything. One example, there was a community in Tamil Nadu known by the name Paravas. They were professionally fishermen, particularly they were pearl fishers. As we know, pearl fishing is very hard and risking their life. They used to go deep into the water and collecting the pearl. And these pearl, they began to sell it to the Arabs who exploited them. When the Portuguese came, these Paravas wanted to approach the Portuguese, requesting their help in buying these pearls from them. Now, when this offer was made, the Portuguese was very happy to buy the pearls on one condition, that was, they wanted all these Paravas to accept Roman Catholic faith and become Christians. They agreed. And nearly 20,000 Paravas were baptized at one point. People who were scatteredly living in 30 villages in and around Thoothukudi, they all became Roman Catholic members and they accepted Christianity there. That means Portuguese made use of every opportunity to propagate their faith. That was their nature. So that they began to do. They took the monopoly from the Arabs and they began to involve in trade, and that trade continued. The third purpose was to preach the gospel. Gospel, I specifically say the Roman Catholicism, Roman Catholic faith, and bring maximum number of people to the Roman Catholic faith. There were large number of people in Malabar during the time who belonged to the weakest sections of the society. So they began to concentrate on them. The fishermen folk in Malabar, particularly we call them as the Mukkuwa community, the Arayan community. Now the Portuguese began to concentrate on them by providing the material assistance, food, other supply. So they slowly began to infiltrate into those coastal area among these fishermen folk, and eventually they were able to convert majority of these fishermen folk to Roman Catholic faith, and as a result they started a new hierarchy in Malabar which came to be known as the Latin hierarchy, Latin Rite, R-I-T, Latin Rite, where Latin became the official language. And all these people, they belonged to look towards the Pope in Rome, and they were very happy to follow the Roman Catholic faith and follow the Latin language and Latin liturgy and Latin tradition. At the same time, when the Portuguese came to India, they already knew that there is a strong community of Christians in Malabar. But initial stage, the relationship was very cordial and friendly between them. Both accepted each other because both had advantages. The Portuguese got a local support from the Malabar Christians, and Malabar Christians were able to accept them because they brought some money, they were involved in trade, they were able to sell their commodities to the Portuguese. So both the parties were very happy in the initial stage. But as they began to get to know each other, both the parties began to realize that there are major differences between the faith of the Portuguese and the faith of the Malabar Christians. Let's have a brief look into what are the major differences between Roman Catholicism, the Western Christianity, and the Orthodox or Eastern Christianity. The first main difference was their allegiance to their leader, ecclesiastical head. The Roman Catholics, including the Portuguese, they owed their allegiance to Pope as the head of the Roman Catholic Church. Whereas the Christians in Malabar, they accepted the Patriarch of Persia as their supreme spiritual head. So this became one of the major difference between Roman Catholicism and the Malabar Christians. Then again, linguistic difference. The Portuguese, they used Latin, whereas the Christians in Malabar, they used Syriac as their ecclesiastical language. Their worship was conducted in Syriac, their liturgy was Syriac, but for the Portuguese, everything was in Latin language. Then coming to the sacraments, there was a major difference between Roman Catholicism and the Malabar Christians. In Roman Catholic Church, they believe or they practice 7 sacraments. Whereas among the Malabar Christians, they practiced only 2 sacraments. Baptism and the Eucharist or Lord's Supper. So these 2 were considered as the sacrament by the St. Thomas Christians. At the same time, in the Roman Catholic Church, they had 7 sacraments. I'll just say the 7 sacraments. Number 1, baptism. Number 2, confirmation. Malayalamil parayunnu sthirikaranam, confirmation. And the third one, of course, Eucharist, Lord's Supper. 4th sacrament was marriage. So marriage also was considered as a sacrament in the Roman Catholic Church. And the 5th one was ordination. 6th one, penance. Penance is forgiveness of sins. The priests and the bishops, they have the right to forgive the sins of the people, penance. And the last one, 7th one, extreme unction, UNCTION. അല്ലെങ്കിൽ മലയാളത്തിൽ പറയുന്നു അന്ത്യകൂദാശ, extreme unction. So 7 sacraments for the Roman Catholic Church and 2 sacraments for the Saint Malabar Christians. So this also became a major difference. Then each sacrament, celebration of each sacrament also was different. In the Malabar tradition, both baptism and confirmation was administered simultaneously together. The children were brought to the church, they were baptized. Then after the baptism, the priest anointed the children with chrism, an oil mixed with honey and milk. Moorun, ennu parayunnu, moorun kudasha kettitundagum. Chrism, Christianized എന്നൊക്കെ പറയുന്ന പദം അങ്ങനെ ഉണ്ടായത്. But baptism and confirmation was done together in the Eastern tradition. But in the Western Catholic tradition, baptism was done, but confirmation was done in a later stage. Eucharist, again there was major difference between Roman Catholic faith and the belief of the Eastern Christians. In Roman Catholic Church, they believed in transubstantiation, transference of the bread and wine into the actual body and blood of Jesus Christ. But the Eastern tradition, the Malabar Christians, they did not believe that. So similarly, marriage was there everywhere. But in Roman Catholic Church, that was a sacrament. But in the Eastern tradition, it was not so. So there are so many differences regarding the sacraments. Then at the same time, again, there were several other differences in the practices also. One, in the Western tradition, Roman Catholic Church, all the clergies were celibate. That means they were not allowed to marry. But in the Eastern tradition, the priests were permitted to marry, but the higher ecclesiastical officers, bishop, patriarch, they were not permitted to marry. They were required to practice celibacy. Then several other practices. In the Catholic Church, there was a practice of worshipping the idols, venerating images, prayer through the saints. But in the Eastern tradition, it was not practiced then. But later they also began to practice after their association with the Roman Catholic Church. So there are several differences between the Catholic faith and the faith of the Malabar Christians. In the beginning, they never realized it. But as they began to get to know one another, they came to the conclusion that their faith is totally different from our faith. Now, the Roman Catholic Church considered all the other Christians as heretics. Catholicism is the only true faith. That is the true sheepfold. And Pope is the real true shepherd. And all the other Christian communities of the Eastern tradition were branded as heretics. So therefore, the Portuguese, the Roman Catholics, began to consider the Christians in Malabar as heretics. And they also began to undertake the responsibility of taking these people from their heresy and bringing them to the Catholic Church, what they believe as the true faith. So there began a long process, numerous steps to bring these St. Thomas Christians, Malabar Christians to Roman Catholic faith. That process we call it as Latinization or Romanization, Latinizing the St. Thomas Christians, Romanizing the St. Thomas Christians. So they began to adopt several measures. The number one, they decided to stop the arrival of all the priests and bishops from Persia to Malabar. Now we can imagine the church in Malabar was totally dependent on the priests and bishops coming from Persia. Since Portuguese had control over the sea route traveling, they were able to stop the arrival of the priests and bishops from Persia. So the first step was to stop any bishop or a priest to come from Persia to Malabar and thereby make the Christians in Malabar a sheepfold without a shepherd. And naturally, they may be forced to turn to the Roman Catholic faith and accept their leadership. So they began to do that, number one. Number two, they began to influence the local rulers, the kings of Kochi, Kozhikode, and other local rulers to influence the Christians under their jurisdiction to leave this Persian connection and join the Roman Catholic faith. That also brought some success because the kings, their word was the ultimate and the people were obliged to listen to them. So that also the Portuguese began to use as another method to Latinize the St. Thomas Christians to Roman Catholic faith. Now, to sum up, for about 100 years, 1498 they came, I said, from 1498 till 1599, 101 year. The Portuguese did everything possible by using different strategies, by using their power and authority, even by their material, with the money, offering money. So by using several methods, the only purpose was to bring these people, break the connection with Persia and bring them under the Roman Catholic Church. For about 100 years, they adopted several methods. They also started seminaries in different parts of Kerala. In 1541 at Kranganur, then in 1581 at Vaipinkota, several seminaries were started by the Roman Catholics to educate the St. Thomas Christians and their children, where they began to teach even Syriac as the medium. So the purpose was to teach them the Roman Catholic way of life, their liturgy, and bring them slowly to the Roman Catholic faith. But that also did not find much success. The candidates who came out of these seminaries conducted by the Roman Catholics, once they were graduated, they were not ready to accept the Roman Catholic faith and move under the Pope, the head of the church. So that also did not find much success. So for about 100 years, one after the other, the Roman Catholics played all the tricks. Every measure they began to undertake, but they could not find a final success for their endeavor. After 100 years, during the time 3 bishops came from Persia. I'm not going to explain those things. Mar Abraham, then Mar Jacob, then Mar Joseph. Once in a while they came, but they were not able to do anything. Portuguese were in control of Malabar. So these bishops, though they came to Malabar, but they were not able to do much. After 100 years, that is in 1595, almost 100 years gone now. In 1595, a young archbishop was appointed by the Roman Catholic Church as the head of the Roman Catholics in India. Meantime, many thousands of people were converted by the Roman Catholics, Latin tradition. Then several churches were built by them. Then in 1534, Goa became a diocese under the leadership of a bishop. So the church began to spread. But this Latinization did not find much success in spite of their work for a period of 100 years. But in 1595, towards the end of that 100-year period, there came a young man, very energetic, very efficient, an exemplary leader of the church, a person by name Archbishop Alexis de Menezes. Alexis de Menezes. Now he came to Goa and he took the charge of the Roman Catholic community in India. But he found out his predecessors for the previous 100 years tried their level best to Romanize the St. Thomas Christians, but they could not do that. So this Alexis, he made up his mind and he resolved that God has sent him to India. What his predecessors were not able to do during 100 years, God has sent him to fulfill that. So he decided to convert, to bring St. Thomas Christians or Malabar Christians totally under the control of the Roman Catholic faith. I said very few bishops and priests were coming from Persia during that 100 years' time. The church was in need of spiritual leadership, but once in a while only a person come. They also never knew Malayalam. So we can imagine the spiritual background of the people, the Christians in Malabar during that 100 years' time. Now taking advantage of this Bishop Alexis de Menezes, he decided to do everything possible to bring the St. Thomas Christians under his control. During that time in Malabar, in the absence of a bishop, a lay office, that means a person who was not ordained, a layman was in charge of the Malabar Christians. From the Pagalomattam, the famous family that was converted by Saint Thomas when he came in the 1st century, from that Pagalomattam family, the people, one of them came to the office of the archdeacon, the main office of the church in Malabar. But it was not an ordained office. He can only look after the physical things, but not the spiritual things. Now, when Archdeacon Menezes came to Goa in 1595, a person by name George was in the office of the Archdeacon. So, conversation between George and Menezes started, mainly through writing letters. So in all the letters, the Archbishop wanted the Archdeacon and the Christians in Malabar to accept the Pope as the leader and to join with the Roman Catholic faith. But Archdeacon George, he knew the danger and he wanted to somehow escape and not to come under the influence of Menezes. So for 3-4 years, correspondence continued between Archbishop Menezes and Archdeacon George in Malabar, but that also did not bring any result. So in 1599, in the beginning, the turn of 1599, Menezes took a drastic decision to come directly to Malabar, meet George and all the priests and the people in Malabar, and try to bring them under the Roman Catholic faith. During that time, there were nearly 130 churches in different parts of Malabar under the Eastern tradition. There were 130 churches. But these churches were established not because of preaching of the gospel, but St. Thomas Christians did not involve in any kind of preaching of the gospel or witnessing, but these 130 churches were the result of purely biological growth. So there were 130 churches. Now, finally, accompanied by the Governor General and several different companies of the Portuguese soldiers, in 1599, Alexis de Menezes, the Archbishop, came to Kochi. After the formalities, he met George and he began to pressurize George to accept Roman Catholic faith. But George did not yield in the beginning. So Menezes decided to travel all over Malabar, visit all these churches, attend one service in these churches and meet the people directly. So Archbishop, accompanied by the Governor General and the soldiers, a large group, they began to visit church after the church. They were Catholics, but now visiting the Eastern tradition churches or the Orthodox churches, St. Thomas Christian churches. But during those visits, he began to attract the people by shaking hands with them, speaking to them cordially, conducting the worship service, preaching in the worship service, then giving the episcopal blessing by placing his hands on the face of the Christians. And finally, he did not forget to please them by giving a sweet meat, which was very common in Kerala during those days. We say kolukkata. So everyone who came to the church was given a kolukkata, which was prepared with the expense given by Alexis de Meneses. When these people received this kolukkata and they opened it, there was also a gold coin inside. There was a gold coin also. Now, all the people who received this kolukkata along with their gold coin, they were highly pleased and they began to praise Alexis de Meneses, and slowly they began to tune their mind towards Alexis de Meneses. Probably not to the Catholic faith, but to the bishop. That was the reason why there is a nickname for the Christians in Malabar, Kolukkata Christianigal. That means for one kolukkata, they left their faith that they followed for the previous 1600 years and they jumped over to a new faith introduced to them. Okay, whatever it may be. Okay, so this was the pattern of work that he did in almost all the churches. Then he also ordained the graduates who studied in their seminaries. So they also became the strong supporters of this archbishop. And traveling all these places, visiting these churches, meeting the people, and the whole St. Thomas Christians began to support Archbishop Meneses, and they slowly began to turn towards Roman Catholic faith. Not knowing the danger, but that attraction that they had towards one man, the Archbishop Alexis de Meneses. He won the heart and mind of the people in Malabar. They all began to support him. They began to stand behind him. And finally, when he saw that all the people are supporting him, he wanted to take an official decision regarding their change of faith from Eastern faith to the Roman Catholic faith. Usually, the official decisions in the church is taken by a council or a synod. So finally, Meneses decided to arrange to call a synod, a council, where he can make an official decision of converting the St. Thomas Christians to Roman Catholic faith. So he began to make preliminary arrangements. There were some Catholic bishops who were well-versed in Malayalam also. So with the help of those people, he began to make all the arrangements necessary for an official general synod, council of the St. Thomas Christians in Malabar. As a decision, a council was called, and this council held in June 1599, from June 20th to 27, 1599. And that synod is the famous Synod of Diamper, D-I-A-M-P-E-R. Diamper is the anglicized form of the place Udayamperur near Tripunithara in Kochi. So he arranged this synod in the church in Udayamperur, near Tripunithara. Now in this council, almost all 99.9% of priests and lay representatives from these 130 churches gathered. on the invitation of Alexis de Meneses. Traveling expense was met by Alexis. Food and accommodation was provided by him. That means he made everything possible to fulfill his purpose in his mind. So the synod met on June 20th. ഒരു 133 priests, nearly 20 deacons, and nearly 650 lay representatives. Total about 800 people gathered together in Udayamperur to attend this synod called by Alexis de Meneses. On the first day, he introduced himself. Then he also explained the purpose why he called this council. Then the second day was the important day of the business. On the second day was the day that he meant to convert the St. Thomas Christians from the Eastern faith to the Western faith, the Catholic Church. Now on the second day, Meneses came forward and he announced that through the proclamation of the faith, proclaiming the Roman Catholic faith, we all are going to do that, and thereby we are going to be a part of the Roman Catholic Church. First, he himself, the Archbishop himself, made the declaration, and he was followed by all the people who attended this council. Thereby, they all of them together took an oath. They proclaimed the faith, leaving this Eastern tradition and accepting the Western tradition. Thus, on the 21st of June 1599, the Malabar Christians, everyone, not with the exception of single person, everyone, including the Archdeacon George, all the families, all the churches, all the priests, everyone, they said goodbye to the Persian connection and the Eastern tradition, and they moved to the Roman Catholic faith, accepting Pope as their supreme ecclesiastical head. So, for 100 years, the Portuguese, they tried their best, but they could not do that. But within 4 years' time, Archbishop Alexis de Meneses was able to fulfill that dream, and the en masse, the entire community, they became part of the Roman Catholic Church, Roman Catholic faith. But one concession was given. They were ready to leave everything. They were ready to leave the Persian connection, but they were not ready to give up the language, Syriac language. We know that the official language of the Catholics is Latin. But the St. Thomas Christians, they made a request that the Syriac language should be replaced or continued even after they joined the Roman Catholic faith. And the Catholic Church, Archbishop Alexis de Meneses, he accepted that request, and they allowed the Syriac language to be retained even after they joined the Roman Catholic faith. That is the reason why that community is now known as the Syro-Malabar tradition hierarchy. It's not Syro, it's Syro, S-Y-R-O, Syriac Syro-Malabar hierarchy. And that is the dominant Catholic community in Malabar and elsewhere in India. Particularly in places like Pala, Thodupuda, Changanasheri, all these areas, the majority of the Roman Catholics, they belong to the Syro-Malabar hierarchy. The people who left Eastern faith and accepted the Roman Catholic faith at the Synod of Edinburgh in 1599. And they constitute the largest number of Christian denomination, number of people in any denomination, particularly in Catholic community. So, no question, everyone, Meneses became very happy. The people also were happy. And Meneses wanted to provide everything necessary, building churches, giving the money. Then he appointed new bishops. Then several priests were appointed by them. He began to take care of the spiritual growth of the church, but necessarily under the Roman Catholic control. Then he left Malabar and he appointed several other bishops also. Francis Rose, Stephen de Brito, then Francis Garcia, several bishops were appointed by the Roman Catholic Church, and they began to give the future leadership for the church in Malabar. But the next 50 years, from 1599 till 1650, the next 50 years, the things were not very smooth. The archdeacons who were having the full responsibility of the church in Malabar, that was taken over by the Catholic bishops. They lost their power and authority in Malabar. So therefore, some people, the archdeacon and his family members, they slowly began to form a group saying that it's not good to remain within the Catholic Church because we do not get any opportunity here. Everything is controlled by the archbishops and the bishops. So why don't we go back to our previous Eastern faith and re-establish our connection with the Persian Church? Remember, not all the Christians, a small group of people, they slowly began to develop an attitude to say goodbye to the Catholic faith, come out of it, and again re-establish connection with the Persian Church. So that movement slowly began to develop. By 1650, they decided to take some drastic steps also for that. What they did was, now the connection with the Persian Church was completely closed. It was not possible to get another bishop from Persia under whose leadership they can go back to the Eastern faith. So this archdeacon and his group, they decided to send letters or to inform all the Eastern tradition churches. We know that there were several Eastern tradition churches: Persian Church, Antiochian Church, Coptic Church, Greek Orthodox Church, several churches were there. So they wanted someone to come from any group, any tradition, so that under their leadership, they can come out of the Catholic Church and come back to the Eastern tradition. But again, remember, the Catholics were so powerful, it was not easy for a bishop to come from the West. But still they tried. By 1652, they got the information that one bishop, they do not know from where he came, one bishop is on the way to Malabar on their request. Now when the bishop reached Malabar, he was caught by the Portuguese. He was detained by them, and he never allowed this bishop to enter into Malabar, meet the archdeacon and form a group and leave Catholic faith and go back to the Eastern tradition. So that dream did not fulfill. Now this made the small group, the archdeacon and the group, very furious. They wanted to make some protest. So a small group of people gathered in Mattancherry, the fort in Kochi, in 1653, January 3rd, 1653, they gathered there. Their remand was to release that bishop who came, who was detained by the Portuguese. But the Portuguese army covered the whole harbor. They blocked the harbor and they did not allow this group of people to enter the harbor, and they were not willing to release this bishop also. As they were waiting outside, they heard the news that the ship where this bishop was staying, detained, the ship slowly began to move from Kochi towards Goa. So the last hope of receiving that bishop, they lost. So the news came that the ship is going to Goa, sailing to Goa with this bishop, and there is no more chance for this bishop to enter Malabar. And meantime, a rumor also was spread among them. The Catholics killed this bishop and threw him into the sea. But that was not true. He was taken to Goa. From there, he was sent back to his own country. But this was a rumor. When this rumor was spread, the Christian, that community, the small group of people became very furious, and they took a decision there that they are no more going to be under the control of the Catholic Church. Whether they have a bishop or not, they are going to leave Catholic faith and going back to the Eastern tradition. But in episcopal tradition, it is not easy to take a decision immediately, an ecclesiastical decision. A council is necessary. A synod is necessary. Proclamation of the faith is important. So they knew that. So what they did was, from harbor, they slowly began to move towards the nearby church in Mattancherry. There was a church in Mattancherry, coastal area, a small church. So these people moved to Mattancherry and they wanted to go into the church. Standing in the church, they wanted to take a proclamation of faith, denying the Catholic faith. They wanted to come back to the Eastern tradition. Some of them went inside the church. Some stood outside. There was a cross erected in front of the church. We know in front of all the episcopal churches there will be a cross. Now some of the people who went inside, standing there, they took the proclamation of faith. They took the proclamation of the faith. But those who were not able to go inside, they stood outside and they began to touch the cross. And those who were not able to touch the cross, some ropes were brought and they tied one end of the rope on the cross and they began to hold the rope in different directions and all of them began to hold on that. By holding on either the cross or the rope or standing inside the church, they took again a solemn profession that they are leaving Roman Catholicism and coming back to the Eastern tradition. This event, the after effect of the Synod of Diamber, Latinization, after 50 years, this took place on January 3rd, 1653, and this event is known as the famous Kunan Cross Oath, Kunan Kurisha Satyam. Kunan Kurisha. The Christian community in Malabar claimed that they pulled the cross, and as a result of the strong force exerted, the cross became bent. But there is absolutely no truth in that. Because in those days, it was in the 17th century, all the crosses were made out of stone. And particularly the crosses outside the church, even still, either with rock or concrete. Now, no one can make the rope to bend. It will break. It's natural. Probably what might have happened was Mattancherry was in the coastal area, sandy bed. This cross, which was erected in that sandy bed, probably by the pulling of the people, it would have slanted to one side. That may be the reality, but we do not know exactly. But there was no possibility of a cross made out of stone to become bent in size. No. Okay, so by 1653, with this event, Kunan Cross, this is considered as the first freedom struggle in India from the foreign domination. But I do not find any element of consciousness of freedom here, but they wanted to get rid of Roman Catholic faith and they wanted to have their authority and power, so they wanted to come back. Okay, so majority of the people remain faithful to the Catholic faith. I said earlier, they are the Syro-Malabar hierarchy today. And a small minority came back to the Eastern tradition, but they had no leader. no bishop. The Archdeacon Thomas, the cousin of the first Archdeacon George, he was consecrated as the bishop under the titular name Mar Thoma I. But that consecration was invalid. Usually in the Episcopal churches, they give much importance to succession, apostolic succession, laying of the hands of a bishop on another person. But Thomas was consecrated by few ordinary people, his own family members, but ecclesiastically that consecration was invalid and not canonical. So this made several blunders and mistakes. One, they came out. Second, they have no proper leader to lead them. And the consecration of Thomas also was invalid. So what happened? Few of them who came out along with Archdeacon Thomas from the Catholic faith, they also made up their mind and they went back to their Catholic faith again. A small minority remained as the members of the Eastern tradition after the Kunenkroth event. So the community was now divided into two. Majority remained in the Catholic faith and they had Syriac as their official language and they came to be known as the Syro-Malabar hierarchy. But a small minority came under the leadership of the Archdeacon. They retained their connection with the Eastern tradition. So this was the after effect of the arrival of the Portuguese in 1498. Within 150 years' time, majority of the St. Thomas Christians were converted to the Roman Catholic faith and they became a very strong community in Malabar. Number one, the Syro-Malabar hierarchy. Then number two, I said they began to propagate the Roman Catholic faith, preaching the gospel among the people from the weaker sections of the society. And among them, hundreds of churches were established by them. And that came to be the second hierarchy, the Latin hierarchy, where Latin became the official language. Then around 1930, a group of Christians from the Orthodox Church, under the leadership of a bishop who founded the ashram in Perunada Rani, Mar Ivanius, a group of Orthodox Christians, they decided to leave the Orthodox faith and again they go back, they wanted to go to the Roman Catholic Church. In 1930, almost 100 years time now. Now, that group is known as the Malankara Catholic Rite, the Malankara Catholic Church. അവരെയാണ് സാധാരണ റീത്തുകാർ എന്ന് പറയുന്നത്. റീത്ത് എന്നുള്ള പദമല്ല, ഇറ്റ്സ് റൈറ്റ്, RITE, മലങ്കര റൈറ്റ്. Trivandrum is the headquarters. That group also began to flourish. Now one of the dominant Catholic community, the Malankara Catholic Church. So three major hierarchies, rites are there in the Catholic Church. All of them except Pope as their head. All of them follow Roman Catholic faith. But Syro-Malabar follows Syriac language, Latin Rite follow Latin language, and the Malankara Catholic Church, they follow both Syriac language as well as Syriac traditions. Their trust is different from the other Catholic bishops and priests. They grow long beard. They have the cap on their head. That means the Malankara Catholic, they follow the Eastern tradition. But at the same time, they are strict followers of the Roman Catholic faith also. Then Kananaya community also, there is another group owing allegiance to the Catholic Church. So there are several Catholic community, all of them accepting the Pope as a supreme head. They follow the Catholic faith. And they constitute the majority of the Christians in Malabar also today. Now back to the St. Thomas Christians, a small group. They never knew what to do next. No leadership. Again, they began to come in contact with the leaders of other Eastern traditions. As a result, In 1665, after 2 years of the Conan Cross event, there came a bishop from the Antiochian church. That was the first time Antioch come in contact with the Christians in Malabar. A bishop by name Mar Gregorios. He came to Malabar in 1665 and he began to make a claim that the church in Malabar, the small group under the archdeacon who came out of the Catholic Church, they are under the Antiochian tradition because all these Eastern churches were in conflict. There were very few members in those areas. Muslim domination came. Majority of them became Muslims. So some of the headquarters were for namesake and they wanted to see someone anywhere and bring them under their control. So the church in Antioch or Antiochian tradition also wanted to claim that the church in Malabar, the minority group, are under the Antiochian tradition. Since that day onwards, the church in Antioch began to make the claim that church in Malabar is in Antiochian tradition. But that also did not last because there was no continuous arrival of the priests and bishops because the whole political situation was dominated first by the Portuguese and eventually by the British. It was not possible for others to come. So there were very few leaders for the minority community in Malabar. Somehow they began to slowly move ahead. No proper leadership, no Bible in their hands to read or understand, no one to give them proper teaching. That was the state of affairs of the St. Thomas Christians who did not join in the Catholic faith. More than that, while their connection with the church for 50 years' time, some of the practices also slowly came along with them. I said earlier, idol worship, invocation through the saints, then medias, considering some saints as the medias, Madhyasthara. So some practices also slowly began to creep inside. So the church was struggling for their existence. No political support, no spiritual benefit, no one to lead, no proper spiritual leadership. This was the situation of the St. Thomas Christians who did not join in the Roman Catholic faith. Time began to move. Biological growth naturally took place. The numbers slowly began to increase. Some of them might have come back from the Catholic faith to this group, and from this group, some of them would have gone to the Roman Catholic faith also. That continued for about the next 100 years' time. From Persia also began to come. Connection was re-established. They also began to claim their authority over the Christians in Malabar. So both communities, this Antiochian church and the Persian church, both began to claim superiority over the church in Malabar. That was the reason why eventually that community was divided into two groups, owing their allegiance, one to the Patriarch of Antioch and the other group owing their allegiance to the Patriarch in Persia. Jacobites and the Orthodox. The head of the Orthodox community, the Bava, Bava Kachi, Metran Kachi. So two groups came. Several reasons are also behind, I'll explain later. So that small community who was struggling for their survival eventually was divided, owing their allegiance to two Eastern traditions. Both are Eastern, but two different traditions. One Antiochian tradition and one Persian traditions. The Christians in the Kochi, North Travancore, and towards the northern part of Malabar, majority of them, they came under the Antiochian tradition. And the Christians in the central Travancore, they remained their allegiance with the Persian tradition. So the community was divided into two. Still also, these two communities are in constant warfare. Hundreds of judicial activities, court cases are there. Two major families, one family, Orthodox, Kottayam-based group, and another group, Kolancheri-based group. These two families are giving the leadership for these two traditions, and probably we can use a family clash between the Kottayam group and the Kolancheri group. That led to hundreds of court cases, Vattipana cases, several. Still that continues. Several churches are closed. In some areas, the police stand in between the two groups to conduct the worship service on Sunday. Recently in Kothamangalam, there was much crisis. Even the government could not solve this issue. There were several orders from Supreme Court even. Still also that problem is not settled. That crisis still continues between these two groups, owing their allegiance to Antioch and Persia. Now, Puttan Kurishi near Muvatuvira is the headquarters of the Antiochian tradition. Manjanikara Church is an important station of the Jacobite community. And the Persian tradition, the Orthodox Christians, they had their connection with Persia. They considered their patriarch as their head. But we know that Persia, Christian majority completely surrendered to the Islam, and majority of the people became Muslims, and there was no church and no leader, no patriarch in Persia. Or we can say the throne of the patriarch in Persia became vacant. The church in Malabar had a strong consciousness that we belong to the Persian tradition. So in 1912, the Orthodox community in Malabar, they decided to transfer that throne of the patriarch from Persia symbolically to Kottayam, Devalogam, where the head of the Orthodox Church, the Catholicos, he stay. So Devalogam is the headquarters in Kottayam of the Orthodox Church. They symbolically transferred the throne of the Patriarch of Persia to Kottayam. So now the Orthodox Church regard themselves as an autonomous church, having no allegiance to Persia now, because there is nothing in Persia, but they follow the Persian tradition and Syriac liturgy even now. So that is the division that we find among the St. Thomas Christians as a result of the arrival of Portuguese and Romanization. Community was divided into three groups now. Majority in the Catholic faith, they had several families, Syro-Malabar, Latin, Malangara, and Kananaya. Then the Eastern tradition is divided into two. The Antiochian tradition, the Jacobite Church, the Persian tradition, the autonomous Indian Orthodox Church. This is the outcome of the arrival of the Portuguese, process of Latinization, Synod of Edinburgh, the Conan Cross event, and the later conflict between all these three groups. So this is a second stage of the history of the churches in Kerala. Now the next phase, the third phase, began from the beginning of the 19th century, from 1800 onwards. We enter into a third phase, a new phase, from where all these developments as we see now, experience today, began. And that was mainly with the arrival of Protestant missionaries from different parts of Europe. From the beginning of the 19th century, several missionary organizations from England, from Germany, they began to send their missionaries to India, particularly to Kerala. They came to Kerala and they began to initiate a long chain of developments which made the church in Malabar, irrespective of Catholicism or Orthodoxy, Eastern or Western, everyone, one way or other, came under the influence of Protestant Christianity, its teaching, and the main influence was the availability of God's word in our own mother tongue. There began the third phase of the church in Malabar. So first phase, I said, from 1st century till the arrival of the Portuguese. The second phase, from the arrival of the Portuguese till the beginning of the 19th century, the arrival of the Protestant missionaries to Malabar. The CMS in the Central Travancore, the LMS in Southern South Travancore, and the Basel Evangelical Mission in North Kerala, Malabar area. They came, they began to do the missionary work, preaching the gospel, and they began to move around Kerala, spreading the gospel, preaching the gospel, establishing churches, establishing schools and colleges, translating the Bible, and that initiated a spiritual revival in Travancore. So that is the third phase, which we have to go into the details probably in the next week. So with this, the time is almost up. So with this, I try to conclude this. So for few centuries, 2-3 centuries, the church continued with one statement made by the Archbishop of the Orthodox Church in 1807, when an Anglican bishop came to him. The bishop said, "The church in Malabar is in a lethargic state. I still hope to see some better days." So he himself admitted that the church was in a sleeping, lethargic mood during that 16, 17, 18 centuries. 17 and 18 centuries. Divisions all over, no proper leadership. This was a situation for about 2-3 centuries, but the whole situation began to change after the arrival of the Protestant missionaries. Widespread revival. It began to sweep across from south to north of Kerala. The society began to change. Other religions also began to renew. The church, Christianity began to grow. Mass conversions began to take place in Malabar, in Kerala. Hundreds and thousands of people from different communities, they began to accept Christianity, and the church began to develop very fast in the 19th and 20th centuries. And the credit goes to the CMS, LMS, and the Basel Evangelical Mission missionaries who came from the beginning of the 19th century. So God was in control of the situation. God did not give up the church in Malabar, the Christians in Malabar. Though there was fighting among them, jumping from one side to the other. But God has a plan. And at the turn of the 19th century, God began to send the missionaries to Malabar, to Kerala. And that initiated a long chain of events which made the Christian community in Malabar so prosperous, revived, and spiritually. So with these words, I close here. And probably if God allows, next week, we'll continue the third phase and its details.